The station hadn't seen a train in 2 days, maybe 3. No one kept track anymore. A single wooden bench sat under the crooked awning, half sheltered from the desert wind. And on that bench, curled up in a faded shawl, slept a woman. Not deeply, never deeply. Sleep came in bursts, interrupted by hunger, by footsteps, by the way her body ached from the cold and the splinters in the wood. But she didn't move, not during the rain, not when the local boys passed and threw pebbles near her feet, not even when the sheriff walked by on the second morning and looked away, pretending he hadn't seen her. Her eyes stayed closed. Her hands remained tight around a small leather bag that contained nothing of value, except for a paper, folded and refolded so many times that the writing had faded to a smudge. It had once been an address. It had once meant hope. Now it was just something to hold. By the third evening, her breath had grown shallow. Her lips cracked and bruised. She hadn't eaten since the bread she brought with her on the train ran out. One loaf, shared with a child beside her who disembarked 2 stops earlier. Still, she sat upright. Still, she kept her shoes on, though they hurt her swollen feet. Still, she waited. The station master didn't speak to her. The shopkeeper across the dirt road muttered that she was probably some trouble from the east, come looking for a man who changed his mind. They weren't wrong. No one asked her name, and she never offered it. She had come believing in something. A letter, a promise, a man whose words had sounded soft and steady when he wrote, but who never came to meet her train. He didn't send a second letter, or the cart he promised, or even a note left with the station clerk. Nothing. She didn't. Cry? Not in front of them. The desert wasn't kind to tears. They evaporated too quickly. It was dusk when the dust rose again, this time not from a train, but from hooves. A single rider approached, slow, steady, without show. He wore a brown coat, stiff from years of sun, and a hat pulled low. His horse walked like it knew not to disturb the stillness of the evening. He didn't speak as he approached, not at first. He stopped at the edge of the platform, one boot still in the stirrup. The woman didn't look up, but he looked at her, not with pity, not like the others, like a man seeing a fire that hadn't gone out. Then quietly, with a voice like dry wood cracking in the hearth, he said just 2 words, "Come home." And then he turned his horse. He didn't wait to see if she would follow, didn't offer his hand or his name. But she stood. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she stood. She picked up her bag, tucked the useless paper deep into it, and stepped off the platform with the last bit of strength she had left. And in that moment, for the first time in 3 days, the bench was empty, and the road ahead didn't feel quite so cold. She didn't ask where they were going. She couldn't. Her throat was too dry, and even if she had the words, she wasn't. Sure, they would come out right. It had been too long since anyone listened. The horse moved at a slow, merciful pace along the narrow trail leading out of town. The man rode ahead, never glancing back, but never getting too far. He didn't speak again, just rode with that steady, grounded presence, like a man who knew the land and didn't fear the silence. She followed on foot. Each step felt like a question. Her legs ached, her shoes pinched. The wind pulled at her shawl like it wanted to finish what the world had started, breaking her apart. But she walked, not because she trusted him, not yet, but because the bench behind her felt colder than the unknown before her, and because of those 2 words, "Come home." No one had said anything like that in years, not since the war took her father, not since her mother's illness, not since she left everything behind for a promise on paper that turned to dust. She'd believed that letter, believed the man who wrote it. He told her he had land, animals, even a spare room. He said, she sounded kind, said he wanted a quiet life with someone who could read, cook, maybe sing. She did all 3, but he never showed. And after 3 days, she stopped believing she was someone worth meeting. They walked for nearly an hour before the first sign of life appeared. A fence, crooked and weather-worn, with a rusted bell hanging from a wooden post. Beyond it, a simple ranch house sat under the setting sun, small, square, and silent. He dismounted without a word, opened the gate with one hand and let it swing closed behind her. No dog barked, no cattle stirred, just wind and the sound of the old wooden door creaking open. He stepped aside. She hesitated. She was used to thresholds, places where she didn't belong, storefronts that told her she wasn't clean enough, churches where the pews seemed to narrow when she walked in, houses that weren't hers, but this door stayed open. He didn't rush her, didn't turn his back, he just waited. So she stepped in. The inside was sparse, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a cold stove, a rocking chair in the corner beside, a worn Bible and an oil lamp. There was no lace, no scent of flowers, no pictures on the wall, but it was clean. He set a pot of stew on the stove. Without speaking, he ladled it into a bowl and placed it on the table. She sat. Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon. The first bite burned her tongue, but she didn't stop. She hadn't tasted food in days. He watched for a moment, then nodded, removed his coat and walked outside. She ate alone. When she finished, she stood and looked around. A single door at the back led to a small room with a cot made of rough wood and clean linen. A basin of water waited on the stand. A folded towel, a candle, no locks, no expectations, only space. She sat on the bed, stared at the flame, and whispered, for the first time in a long time, "I'm still here." And outside, unseen in the dark, the man leaned against the post with arms crossed, staring at the stars, like a soldier watching over something he wasn't ready to name. She woke with the light, not the harsh kind that pierces through curtains, but the soft kind, the kind that spills through slats in wooden shutters and touches the room like a memory. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The cot. Beneath her was too still, too clean. Her body wasn't cold. Her bag sat at the foot of the bed, untouched. She touched her neck, half expecting the shawl to be gone, but it was still there, folded beside her. She hadn't folded it. Someone had. She stood, still barefoot, and stepped to the basin. The water was fresh. The towel was warm from where it had hung near the stove. The silence of the place wasn't empty. It was full of intention. After she dressed and stepped into the main room, she found a plate of bread and a tin cup with warm milk waiting for her. He wasn't there. She stood in the middle of the room, unsure what to do. She wasn't used to being somewhere that didn't ask for something in return. No chores, no orders, no instructions, just bread, just warmth. Then she heard it, the low sound of a shovel biting the earth outside. She stepped to the door and looked out. There he was, shirt sleeves rolled up, hat low over his brow, digging along the fence line where weeds had crept over. The movement was slow, methodical. He didn't pause when he saw her. He just gave a single nod, an invitation. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She just walked toward the garden shed, picked up a worn rake, and began, clearing the dead brush near the fence without asking. They worked all morning, no words, just wind and sweat and the rhythm of labor. By noon, she was light-headed, but smiling, though she didn't realize it until he handed her a tin cup of water and gestured toward the porch. They sat, 2 chairs, weathered by sun. One empty for a long time, now occupied again. He didn't look at her directly. His eyes were always watching the land, the horizon, the clouds gathering in the east. But when he spoke, just once, it was to say, "Storm's comin'." She nodded. She hadn't spoken a word yet, not out of fear, but because she didn't want to break the strange, holy quiet between them. Later, as the clouds rolled in, she explored the house a little more. There was a small room at the back lined with books. Most were about horses, tools, the land, but one shelf held older things, poetry, scripture, and a journal left half-finished. Beside it, a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and hair pinned tight. She wasn't smiling, but something about her posture said love. Deep and stubborn. Was she his wife? She didn't touch the frame. That night, the rain came. Heavy, wild. Thunder cracked above the plains like cannon fire. She startled in her bed. But before fear could rise, she heard footsteps. Slow, heavy. Then outside her door, a pause, and the sound of something being placed on the floor. In the morning, when she opened it, a folded blanket lay waiting, dry and warm. He never knocked, he never asked, but somehow he knew. The storm passed by morning, leaving the earth soft and smelling of iron and sage. She stepped out with bare feet and stood under the low porch awning, watching the wind move through the grass like an invisible hand. The clouds were thinning. The world, for once, didn't seem to want anything from her. Behind her, the house was still. She hadn't seen him since the night before, but she felt his presence in every small detail. The blanket by the door, the firewood stacked near the hearth, the tin bowl of water changed before dawn. She moved through the rooms slowly, not like a guest, but like someone trying not to disturb something sacred. In the corner of the main room was a chest, worn but clean. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. There were enough signs already. A faded dress hung behind the bedroom door, its seams letting go near the shoulders. A woman's. Brush rested on the dresser, still carrying strands of dark brown hair. A small book of hymns lay open beside a cracked ceramic cup on the windowsill. She recognized the song, "Abide with Me." She used to sing it when the world felt too wide to survive. There had been someone here before, someone who'd loved quietly and left quietly. She didn't know if death had taken her or distance or something else, but she knew loss lived in this house, not as a wound, but as a presence. Like dried lavender hanging from a beam, it no longer bloomed, but it still carried the scent of what once was. She found herself in the kitchen, her hands moving instinctively. She boiled water, cleaned the counters, kneaded leftover flour into small rounds, and set them to cook over the open flame. She didn't ask permission, and when he walked through the door, late in the morning, with dust on his boots and mud at the hem of his trousers, he didn't ask what she was doing. He just stood there for a moment, looking at the pan, then at her. His gaze lingered, quiet, unreadable, and then he simply nodded once, the same way he had the first time he saw her. They sat together, not across the table, but side by side on the bench by the hearth, both staring into the small fire that hadn't quite died since the night before. She handed him a plate. He took it gently, like the food was a gift he didn't expect. Halfway through eating, he spoke. "You keep busy." His voice was like gravel soaked in memory. She looked down, then nodded once. There was still dust in her throat, but it felt like something was beginning to loosen. She wanted to ask his name. She wanted to offer hers, but something held her back. Not fear, not shame, reverence. This house wasn't ready for names yet, and neither were they. Later that evening, as the sun dropped low and the sky burned orange, she stepped outside to hang the laundry she had washed by hand. The wind caught one of the sheets and flung it high, revealing the man standing by the fence line, staring out over the hills. He didn't move, didn't speak, but for the first time she noticed something different about his posture, not just stillness, but listening. Like the land itself was telling him something, like maybe it was finally time to let someone else in. Days passed, not in the way city days pass, marked by clocks and schedules, but in the old way, by light and shadow, by the way the wind changed, by how the trees leaned when the storms came. She began to rise early, before the rooster. The old routines settled into her bones, like they had always belonged there. The chores didn't feel like work. She swept the porch, she folded blankets, she rinsed vegetables and set them to dry in the sun. He didn't ask her to do any of it, but he didn't stop her either. He spent most mornings out in the far pasture, mending a fence that looked like it had been broken for years. She watched him from the ridge sometimes, a dark figure against the dry gold of the grass, moving with the patience of someone who'd never rushed a single thing in his life. Sometimes in the evenings he'd bring in a bundle of wood and set it beside the fire without a word. Other times he left small things behind: an apple on the table, her boots repaired, a clean rag for the stove. Once she found a new bar of soap by the basin, wrapped in brown paper, scentless, practical, but to her it felt like a flower placed at a grave. He never asked questions. He never told her what to be. He just let her be. One afternoon, as she rinsed laundry in the basin outside, she saw him walking back from town with a box tied in twine. He placed it on the porch and nodded toward it. Inside was a pair of shoes, sturdy, worn but solid. Her size. He didn't say a word. She didn't need him to. That night she took a risk. She roasted the rabbit he'd brought back, seasoned it with thyme she found near the barn, and added potatoes. She set the table, lit a single candle, and waited. He stepped inside just as the wind picked up. He paused when he saw the scene. Then for the first time he took off his hat before sitting down. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the heavy kind. It was full, like a church with no sermon, just presence. When they finished, he stood, looked at her for a long time, and said quietly, "Thank you." She nodded. Then, before she could stop herself, she whispered, "My name's Ruth." The words came out softer than she expected, like something fragile breaking free after too long in the dark. He didn't respond at first. Then he turned slightly toward her, the corner of his mouth lifting, just barely, and said, "Cole." No last names, no history, just names, given gently, not claimed. That night, Ruth stood under the stars longer than she needed to. The wind carried the scent of cedar, and somewhere in the distance an owl called. Inside, the fire still burned low. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she wasn't bracing for it. It was a Thursday. When the dust rose on the road again, Ruth saw it first through the kitchen window just after sunrise. 2 riders, one older, one leaner, both in clean shirts that didn't match the dirt and wind of real ranch work. They rode like men used, to taking things, not asking for them. She stepped onto the porch and instinctively wiped her hands on her apron. Cole had gone out to the barn an hour earlier. He hadn't returned. The riders dismounted slowly, boots thudding against dry earth. The older one tipped his hat. "Mornin', ma'am." She said nothing. She didn't need to. The fear was already tightening in her chest. "We're looking for a woman passed through the station 'bout a week ago. Wore a shawl, looked a little lost." His smile was polite, but it didn't reach his eyes. The younger one leaned against the porch rail. "See? She left town owing a man some money. He says she was going to marry him, but ran off with the ring instead." Ruth's face didn't change. She didn't flinch. But inside, everything locked down, her ribs, her breath, her voice. The older man stepped forward. "You wouldn't happen to know anyone like that, would you?" Before she could answer, a door creaked behind them. Cole stepped out of the barn, sleeves rolled, hammer still in hand. He didn't say a word, didn't ask what they wanted. He just walked up to the porch and stood beside Ruth, his presence quiet but unmistakable. The 2 men straightened. The older one cleared his throat. "Morning, sir." "We were just—" Cole's eyes were fixed on him, still, unblinking. It was the kind of look a man gives when he's already decided how far he's willing to go. The younger man shifted his weight. "We got no trouble here, just asking. Questions." Cole stepped forward once, not fast, not aggressive, just enough to make the porch creak. It was more than enough. The older man raised both hands slightly, like surrendering to a man who hadn't even drawn a gun. All right, we'll let the law sort it." He tipped his hat again, this time without the smile. As they turned to leave, Cole spoke. 3 words, flat, firm, final. "She owes nothing." The older man hesitated for just a breath, then nodded and walked away. Ruth didn't speak until the riders were just 2 silhouettes against the morning sun. Then softly, "They'll come back?" Cole nodded once. "Maybe." She looked at him, Really looked. How'd you know? He met her gaze. Doesn't matter. It should have felt like evasion, like avoidance, but it didn't. It felt like protection. That evening, he nailed the gate shut. Not locked, just closed. A line drawn. And Ruth, for the first time, placed a hand on his arm and left it there. She didn't ask what he would do if they returned. She already knew. Whatever ghost still haunted him, whatever pain he buried beneath the silence, he would not let harm cross that threshold. Not now. Not while she was there. The days that followed were quiet. Not the kind of quiet Ruth had known on the station bench, where silence meant absence. This was a different quiet, one filled with motion, rhythm, and breath. She began rising with the sun, not out of habit, but out of want. Her hands reached for tasks before her mind could name them. She swept the steps, tended the stove, and refilled the water basin with care. The routine no longer felt like survival, it felt like purpose. One morning, while exploring the edges of the property, Ruth found it. A small, overgrown patch behind. The barn, the remains of what had once been a garden, a low fence half buried by earth, a rusted watering can tipped on its side, a rose faintly visible in the soil, as if someone had once knelt there, again and again with hope in their hands. She crouched down and brushed away the weeds. Her fingers met something solid, a weathered wooden sign, barely readable. But when she tilted it toward the sun, the words came through, Clara's garden. She didn't need to ask who Clara was. That evening after supper, she stepped onto the porch where Cole sat, whittling a piece of wood with slow precision. She stood beside him in silence for a moment. Then softly she asked, "Would it be all right if I brought it back?" He didn't look up, just nodded once. "Needs it," he said. She smiled, and the next day she began. She worked with her hands in the soil for hours, dug up roots, pulled stones, piled weeds to burn. Her back ached, her nails cracked, but her soul felt lighter than it had in years. Cole passed by sometimes with lumber or tools, saying nothing, but pausing just long enough for her to know he saw. By the end of the week, green returned. Small, quiet shoots, signs of life that didn't need to announce themselves. One evening, she came back inside and found a simple wooden sign resting on the kitchen table, freshly carved, letters neat, careful, Ruth's garden. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't ask when he'd done it. She didn't need to. That night, she stood at the doorway to her small room, candle in hand, unsure of what to say, but Cole, sitting by the fire, spoke first. "Looks good. The garden." She nodded, then hesitated. "I used to have one. Before I lost everything." He didn't ask what she meant by everything, just waited, and she found herself saying, "I never thought anything would grow again." He looked into the fire for a long time before saying, "Sometimes the ground just needs rest." She held on to those words like a prayer. Later, after she'd gone to bed, the wind picked up outside, but it didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like movement, like change. And Ruth, curled beneath her quilt, whispered something into the night. She hadn't dared say aloud in years, "Thank you for seeing me." No one replied, but in her dream, the earth bloomed. The garden was thriving. Sprigs of green stretched toward the sun like they'd been waiting for her hands. The old wooden sign now bore her name, and each time Ruth passed it, a strange warmth bloomed in her chest, quiet and persistent. Then the clouds came back, dark, rolling, heavy, the kind that don't ask for permission. She felt it before the first drop hit, how the air thickened, how the birds quieted, how Cole stood longer than usual at the fence line, watching the horizon like it owed him something. "Storm again?" she asked as she joined him. He nodded. "Worse than the last." The rain started that evening. At first, a soft patter, then a roar. Ruth rushed to pull the sheets from the line. Cole was already out, securing the shutters, tying the barn door shut with thick rope. She darted toward the chicken coop, skirts dragging in the mud, and tried to gather the last two hens. Lightning cracked. Thunder followed like a giant's growl. She stumbled, not far but enough. Her foot sank into the soft earth, her hands hitting the ground to break the fall. Before she could rise, she felt it, his coat thrown over her shoulders, warm and soaked all at once. Cole crouched beside her, eyes level with hers, the brim of his hat dripping onto his collar. "You all right?" he asked for the first time with urgency. She nodded, breathless. They stood together, not holding hands, not speaking more. Just two people soaked to the skin, their outlines blurred by rain and mud and everything they hadn't said. Inside, she peeled off the wet dress and wrapped herself in the spare blanket from the chest. He stoked the fire without a word. Back to her, his hair dripping onto the wooden floor. When she stepped closer, he offered his place near the flames. They sat side by side, steam rising from their clothes. He handed her a tin cup of tea. It shook slightly in his hand, just enough for her to notice. She took it gently. Then, in a whisper almost lost in the crackle of the fire, he said, "You don't have to be afraid here." She looked at him, really looked. His eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from years of carrying silence like armor. "I'm not," she said. "Not anymore." The room held its breath. Then slowly he reached over, not for her hand, but for the small towel resting on the edge of the chair. He offered it to her. She accepted it, dried her face, her hair. Then without asking, she reached for his. Gently, she pressed the towel to his temple, wiping away the water that clung to him like sorrow. He didn't flinch, didn't move, and when her fingers brushed the edge of his jaw, something passed between them. Not desire, not yet, but trust, like two trees leaning toward the same sun after a long, dry season. When the thunder faded, they sat in silence, wrapped in warmth with the storm no longer between them, but outside where it belonged. The storm passed. Morning came with clear skies and the scent of wet cedar. The earth glistened. The garden, battered but unbroken, stood strong, just like her. Ruth woke early, brewed coffee, and placed a clean cup beside Cole's seat on the porch. It was a habit now, not service but care. A ritual between two people who understood each other in silence. She stepped outside to hang the blankets, and that's when she saw it. A letter, tucked under a rock at the gate, dry somehow, as if it had been placed just before the storm broke. She picked it up with careful hands. There was no name on the envelope, just a single seal pressed into the paper, a sheriff's star. Inside, the message was brief, a summons. Her name, Ruth Eleanor Carter, written in formal script, a request to return to town and testify. The man who once promised her marriage had filed a claim, accusing her of fraud, of theft, of abandonment. And now, the law was calling. She stood frozen at the gate. The paper trembled in her grip, but her hands didn't. She could almost hear the station again, the cold bench, the whispers, the hunger. She could feel the judgment crawling back like smoke under a closed door. Then she felt another presence. Cole. He had come up behind her, silent as always. He glanced at the paper but didn't reach for it. "They won't stop," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Not unless I go." He looked at her, expression unreadable. "Then go." She turned sharply, eyes wide. "And what if they don't let me come back?" He didn't blink. "Then I'll come find you." The simplicity of the words undid something in her. She stepped forward, pressed the paper against his chest, and whispered, "I don't want to go." Cole took the letter, walked back to the fire pit, and dropped it in. Together they watched it curl, blacken, and vanish into flame. The wind carried the ashes toward the hills. Later that day, they built a new sign. It wasn't grand, just a simple wooden board carved with steady hands. Together, they hammered it into the post at the end of the path, just before the gate. It read, "Home of R&C, no last names, no titles, just two letters, side by side." That evening, Cole brought out two chairs. They sat, watching the sun bleed into the plains. Ruth reached over, not hesitantly, and rested her hand on his. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his fingers closed around hers like they'd always known the shape. A hawk soared overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle cried. But Ruth didn't turn. She wasn't waiting anymore. Winter came with soft warnings. The sky turned pale in the mornings, and the frost clung longer to the edges of the fence posts. The chickens huddled closer each night, and the wind took on a whispery edge, like it was brushing old stories off the hills. Ruth had never stayed in one place long enough to notice seasons. But here, she felt them, not just in the land, but in her body, in her breath. In the slow way, she moved through the house, tending to warmth as if it was something sacred. By late November, the garden had gone to sleep beneath a layer of straw. Cole helped her build a frame over the sprouts, not to preserve the harvest, but to protect the memory of what had grown. They didn't speak much while they worked, but their hands moved in rhythm, his hammer, her twine, his shadow, her breath. Inside the house, the fire never went out. She rose before dawn to light it. He added logs through the day. It was their ritual, a quiet devotion not to the flames, but to each other. One morning, Ruth woke to find a new pair of gloves folded beside the stove. She hadn't asked for them, but he'd noticed the cracks in her hands, the red beneath her fingernails, the way she winced when she wrung out the washcloths. The gloves were thick, hand-stitched, lined with lamb's wool. When she slid them on, they fit perfectly. She didn't say thank you. She baked cornbread instead. Cole smiled when he tasted it. And that was enough. The days shortened. The light faded faster. But there was no sense of loss in it. Not this time. The shadows that used to make her heart race now felt like old companions. Familiar, predictable. One night, while clearing out a box in the shed, Ruth found something unexpected. A bundle of old letters. Most were addressed to Clara. Some were lists, groceries, repairs, feed, but one stood out. It was dated 10 years earlier, in Cole's handwriting. If I lose her, I don't know if I'll speak again. Not because I'm angry, just because words won't hold anything anymore. Ruth sat with that line for a long time. Then she placed the letter back exactly where she found it. She didn't need to mention it. She already understood. Later that week, a snowstorm arrived without warning. Heavy, wind-driven, bitter. Ruth was outside feeding the hens when it hit. She tried to hurry back, but the wind caught her scarf and she turned to chase it. She never reached it, because Cole appeared from the barn, striding through the white blur, his coat already dusted with snow. He said nothing, just wrapped his arms around her and pulled her in close, shielding her body with his. They stayed like that for a moment, the storm swirling around them, two silhouettes anchored in the middle of it all. When they made it inside, he dried her hair with a towel by the fire. She didn't stop him. She leaned into the gesture like a child, returning to something she never got to finish. That night, wrapped in thick quilts, they sat beside the window, watching the flakes dance past the glass. Cole turned to her quietly. "You warm." She smiled, eyes soft. "I'm never cold anymore." And she meant it. Not just her skin, but the places no one else had touched in years. Her spirit, her hope, the old ache that lived just beneath her ribs. It was gone. Because this was home now, and he was the one who whispered her into it.
If this story stirred something in your heart, if you've ever felt unseen, or found warmth in the most unexpected place, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might comfort someone else, just as Ruth and Cole found comfort in silence. And if you believe in the quiet power of kindness, redemption, and love that doesn't need to shout to be heard, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There are more stories waiting for you, ones that speak gently but stay forever.